Assalamu alaikum, everyone. We're continuing tonight from verse 249, Surah Baqarah, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فلما فصل طالوت بالجنود قال إن الله مبتليكم بنهر فمن شرب منه فليس مني ومن لم يطعمه فإنه مني إلا من اغترف غرفة بيده فشربوا منه إلا قليلا منهم فلما جاوزه هو والذين آمنوا معه قالوا لا طاقة لنا اليوم بجالوت وجنوده قال الذين يظنون أنهم ملاقوا الله كم من فئة قليلة غلبت فئة كثيرة بإذن الله والله مع الصابرين ولما برزوا لجالوت وجنوده قالوا ربنا أفرغ علينا صبرا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين فهزموهم بإذن الله وقتل داود جالوت وآتاه الله الملك والحكمة وعلمه مما يشاء ولولا دفع الله الناس بعضهم ببعض لفسدت الأرض ولكن الله ذو فضل على العالمين تلك آيات الله نتلوها عليك بالحق وإنك لمن المرسلين صدق الله العظيم. Can we share the translation? Ustadh Sadeq?
I share it?
I can't share it if you want.
Sorry, I don't have it. I didn't get it ready. Ustadh Sohaib will be joining us soon, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. When Saul set out with his forces, he said to them, God will test you with a river. Anyone who drinks from it will not belong to me, but anyone who refrains from tasting it will belong with me. Whoever scoops up just a handful will be excused. But they all drank deeply from it, except for a few. When he crossed it with those who had kept faith, they said, we have no strength today against Goliath and his warriors. But those who knew that they were going to meet their Lord said, how often a small force has defeated a large army with God's permission. God is with those who are steadfast. When they met Goliath and his warriors, they said, our Lord, pour patience on us, make us stand firm, and help us against the disbelievers. And so with God's permission, they defeated them. David killed Goliath, and God gave him sovereignty and wisdom and taught him what he pleased. If God did not drive back some by means of others, the whole world would be ruined. But God is bountiful to everyone. These are the revelations of God which we recite to you, O Muhammad, with the truth. And you truly are one of the messengers. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So this story is continuing. It's a 2-page story. The second juz finishes with this interesting story of Talut, Saul, mentioned here, and Jalut, Goliath, and Dawood alayhi salam. The Jews wanted a king. They wanted a king, so they asked their prophet for God to appoint them a king so they could fight. And then the Prophet says, what if fighting is prescribed and you don't do it? And they said, how can we not fight? We've been expelled from our homes. And when the Prophet was appointed, Talut, just to wrap up from last week, they said, we've been given more. We are more worthy. Why? Because he was not from a family of those who had been given. They weren't expecting him to be. He wasn't from the lineage of kings. They said they had more wealth and they were more worthy of it. And then, as a sign, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sends this tabut, which is how we finished it off last week, just before the verse that we started this week. And here Imam Harali and all that already point out that whoever requires a miracle to believe often leaves faith very quickly and easily. So the fact that they required this miracle shows that actually from the very beginning of the story, the way at least Imam Baqai, Imam Harali analyzes their du'as and their ask and they're wanting to fight, it's all sort of red signs or signs of danger. Welcome, Ustadh Sohaib. We just started with the recitation. We're just starting the translation.
Excellent.
Yeah. We went through the translation of the page as well.
We just read the translation.
That's fine.
Now that you have come, I'll say Ja al-ma'u wa batala tayammum.
Keep the water flowing. Bismillah.
Okay. So according to Imam Harali, in those boxes, I'm going to be a little bit back. The two tablets were there where the Musa was given the 10 commandments. And he says that the Amalek were the companions of Jalut. And if I'm not mistaken, these were the same people that were unfortunately referenced by people who like to hijack the religion of Judaism for political purposes.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how powerful that story is unfolds in these ayat about David and Goliath. It's the mathal, it's the proverb that's given about the smaller group facing off the bigger. كم من فئة قليلة غلبت فئة كثيرة بإذن الله.
But it's the opposite in today's situation. It's one of the world's largest nuclear-powered armies.
Yeah, and it's quite. It's almost quaint and amusing how some people try to frame themselves as everyone wants to be the David in the situation, when they have, إن الناس قد جمعوا لكم فاخشوهم فزادهم إيمانا. This is our brothers and sisters who are facing off the oppression, who are staring the oppressors in the face. They're the ones who have the right to, first of all, make this dua as they are doing, and to be identified as the other expression that's used in English, the underdog. And those who want to claim that there is, they are the small group facing off the bigger group. They say, oh look, but there are so many Arab countries and so many Muslim countries, and in theory that sounds like that those numbers should be meaningful, but numbers in fact by themselves do not guarantee any strength. Even Allah Azza wa Jalla describes in some of the ayat about how what is the minimum number of people that that you should expect to be able to face off 10 times their number. But then he says, now he sees a weakness in you. So now he says, I still expect you to face off twice your number, in the sense that anything less than that, and you would be held to account with the severe punishment of fleeing the battlefield.
Yeah.
So we have strength and weaknesses, and then now how the situation is something else altogether. We have numbers, and it is like how the Prophet ﷺ described that there would come a time when everyone will gather around to eat from you like you are the dinner being served up on a plate to the world. And everyone will come, all the different nations will come and take their pieces from you. And the Sahaba asked naturally, oh, Ya Rasulullah, are we going to be in smaller number then? Almost it pains me to to finish the hadith. He says, no, you will be large in number. but you will be like the froth on the ocean. Basically, the scum on the sea, tossed around. And they said, why is that? He said, because
Wahan.
you will have been taken over by al-Wahan. Al-Wahan, of course, they would have understood the meaning of the word. It means weakness, but it's like, what do you mean by al-Wahan? It says it is the love of the dunya, and it is fear of death. So you see here the people described in these ayat that we are reading as they are, you know, يظنون أنهم ملاقو ربهم. This dhann, this certainty that they are going to meet Allah, it means also like they've cast aside any worry about death. Because whatever happens, in fact, they are hopeful. يرجون لقاء Allah. They're actually expectant and hopeful and optimistic and looking forward to the meeting with Allah because of how they have stood firm. And then who do they depend upon for this firmness? Depend upon Allah, and they make the dua. They ask Allah's strength. So that strength doesn't come from within us, you know, so much as it comes from the guidance of Allah, and so our dependence on Him. So that weakness before Him, that vulnerability is what creates the strength within people. And then within these ayat also, the discipline, you know, the obedience to the messengers. Immediately a prophet tells them something, they argue. And then he appoints them a king, they argue with him. He tells them to do something, he gives them a clear instruction. Most of them are unable to stick with it. And, you know, there's so much in that for us to ponder on, really.
Yeah, just with the tabut, Imam Baqai says that he actually says it's a major sign indicating the khilaf of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And I was interested to see where he goes with that. He goes because he was entrusted with leading the prayers, which is the summation of this religion, just as the tabut was the summation of their religion. And it's also a stern warning to anyone who may criticize him about not being descendants of Bani Hashim or Abdi Manaf, because these were the families where leadership of Quraysh came from. And, you know, he goes on continuing. Every time there's a miracle of prophets mentioned, Imam Baqai tends to feel the need to also quickly mention a similar miracle and saying this is not greater than the miracle of the Prophet. So when the Sakina was mentioned, he goes, this is not greater than the miracle. That was the story of Safina, a companion named Safina, who was asked by the Prophet to carry the mata', the equipment of so many companions by himself. And he said, you know, if there was even 5 camel loads or a full camel load, I would have still been able to carry it. You know, he always pops in, mentions miracles of the companions just to show that it's the same story being repeated. Yeah, so mubtalikum binaharin. Then the next verse, which we started today, that Allah will test you. It's a reminder, I guess, that blessings are always, it's a bit of a test as well as it's a blessing. It's how we react to it. You know, when Sulaiman alayhi salam had these arsh of Bilqis brought to him before the blinking of an eye, he immediately realized that this is a test. So some of them, they're told not to drink from it. They're going to cross it. And they're not meant to taste it. Yata'amhu. And it's interesting, it says yata'amhu, right? Actually,
Yes.
it's not yashrabhu, it's yata'amhu. Like not even taste it. But then after saying not taste it, he goes, except for those who have a ghurfatan, just a handful, I believe.
Yeah.
Of water. So it's...
So, yeah, it's the construction is like this. فَمَنْ شَرِبَهُ فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي. So shurb implies going down your throat. Ta'am implies just the part where it gets into your mouth. So it's like there's a kind of like 2 extreme ends of the spectrum. One is to drink freely from it. Those people, فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي, implying either I will leave them behind, that they will not follow us in the army, or just it could be that they still accompany, but they're sort of like not in the elite, right? So they don't get to be, close. Laysa minni has this sort of closeness aspect with it. But then there's an exception to that, although there's a intervening phrase. This is how Ibn Ashur analyzes it. He prefers it this way: that it's like whoever drinks it, except whoever drinks more than غرفة بيده or غرفة بيده, another reading, which is just the amount of one hand. And of course, to swallow it, that's expected. But there is a special elite who will not even taste it, right? And so, in and of itself, you could see it's just a test of their obedience, a test of their patience. Presumably, Talut himself is not drinking from this river, so he's showing them the example. But he is saying, yeah, if you do, it's fine. If you take a handful, it's fine. And even that is equivalent. But there is a sense of, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَطْعَمْهُ فَإِنَّهُ مِنِّي. The ones who would be closest to me are the ones who don't even taste it.
Obviously, there's a spiritual interpretation. Some have said that the water is like the dunya. And Imam Baqai himself alludes to it. That what is that famous saying of Sayyid Nursi, rahmatullah alayh, that you have the permission to taste it, but not to be fully satiated. So Imam Baqai says a bit like that too, that it's a metaphor. He doesn't say metaphor, but no.
It's Ibn Kathir talks about, like, he narrates that there's 80,000 people in his army, in Talut's army, but the ones who actually go across the river without, who passed the test are only 310. And he cites a hadith from Bukhari, from Ibn Jarir, that the people who joined the Battle of Badr were more than 310, just as many as the soldiers who crossed the river with Talut. So there's a bit of a comparison between the two. And the Muslims did have the victory there. And same with Uhud as well. There were people who pulled out, the hypocrites. And it's almost as this purification process that takes place, especially when people are going to face really difficult situations. Ustadh Sohaib, you mentioned that hadith where the believers unfortunately will be like the froth. Sometimes having only a fraction of people, but who are dedicated to believe in what they're doing and they're committed, can achieve outstanding results, extraordinary. And those who are on board, who are like the froth, cause doubts and issues and so forth amongst those believers. So it's actually, the numbers become a disadvantage for a party at times. So we're seeing another example of it here.
Yeah, I don't know if this opinion exists, but those that aren't able to pass the next test may have been those who just had that ghurf of water in the first test. Did any one of your mufassirs or you've come across such opinions?
Doesn't kind of talk about them.
It's not that anyone failed the test, but rather you mean those who maybe expressed more fear and weakness. We have no strength today. You mean this group?
Yeah. Not fail a test, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It could be.
Okay.
But I think sometimes, is life so simple? Sometimes we do better in one thing and less well in another thing. So there could be a strong correlation between the two.
Not a causation.
But maybe there's a reason why there isn't a sort of direct line drawn in the ayah between one. But maybe the ishara is there in a sense that there would be some who, through their actions, demonstrate a stronger level of yaqeen within themselves. Because, here they have to trust that they're going to be fine without taking more water. That may be interpreted as a military strategy as well, that, you know, overloading on water, and sort of the temptation would be there once you start. When do you stop? And then you've got long terrain to cover. You know, I don't know about these things, and I don't know if Ibn Ashur necessarily knows, but he talks as if he knows that you know, might struggle if you fill up too much. So at most, take your need, and then we need to keep moving. You need to stay light, and you need to stay agile. So those who show the discipline to obey this may well be those who had the stronger, you know, yaqeen about the akhirah. So these can be interlinked.
And the first test, which is the river, and I guess Ustadh Sadeq mentioned from Biqai, that could be the dunya. And then the second test could be, as the hadith says, the fear of death, when they actually meet Jalut, and Jalut is known to be this big, strong commander, and his army, they see the numbers. So now it's the fear of death. So the people who can overcome both of these tests, obstacles, are the ones victorious. So maybe just moving on to the next verse, perhaps. Ibn Kathir talks about how how Talut actually promised that if anyone is able to kill Jalut, the commander of the opposition army, would then he would marry his daughter and would share his kinship and authority with him. And so when Dawood comes as a young man or a young boy, and it mentions that he kills him with a slingshot that he had, so the Talut keeps his promise and makes him, marries off his daughter to Dawood, and also gives him that royal position as well. But yeah, I guess, you know, when there is no, these are the points where you expect, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like in Badr, sends his angels out of nowhere to bring victory to the believers. Sometimes it comes in the hands of, let's say, a young boy through a slingshot, or however it was. But ultimately, it's, I think, that the tawheed, that it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. It's not when you threw, it wasn't who you threw, but it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who threw. That the victory ultimately comes through him. These are just the means that are presented to us in different occasions and stories that we see in the Quran.
Yeah, Imam Harali quotes the same verses that you just did, Ustadh Ahmed.
وَمَا رَمَيْتَ one?
No. You know, in relation to that verse towards the end, if it wasn't for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishing, you know, defending one people by those of others, there's this beautiful hadith. It's a very famous one, we all know. I just like to quickly quote that. And if it was not for the weak in this ummah, those whose backs are bent, or in a state of, you know, sajda, almost like, the musibats, the masai will be raining upon you.
So the prophethood comes to Dawud alayhi salam later. Like, just looking at the Diyanat Tafsir, right? So first he becomes a malik, let's say a king, but then the prophethood comes to him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants it to him. So he becomes a malik. I was reading a saying today. I think we'll come to it a bit later, but talks about there were two kings in the east and two kings in the west. The two kings he refers to in the east are Dawood and Sulaiman, alayhim salam, I think. So
who are the two kings in the west then? You can't give us.
he mentioned, I think it was Nimrod, and there was this name, I think it was in the notes. It was a bit of a different name, so.
But then I'm not sure what
yeah,
do you mean.
Nimrod and Nebuchadnezzar.
Oh, Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they mean by east and west then.
Yeah. So this is Mujahid actually. Mujahid saying the kings who ruled the east.
They may be the east, relatively speaking. Perhaps those two are the east, and then the west.
Yeah, because Iraq, Babylon is more east than Yemen.
All right. Yeah, he just says that the kings who ruled the eastern and western parts of the world are four: two believers and two disbelievers. I think he's just referring to in general.
Those who had an extensive kingdom from east to west.
Yeah.
Of course, there's al-Qarnayn as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Sorry. Yeah, it says Sulaiman bin Dawood and Dhul-Qarnayn. You're right, Ustadh Saeed.
Oh, okay. So yeah, this principle here, ولولا دفع الله الناس, or ولولا دفاع الله الناس in the other قراءة, بعضهم ببعض لفسدت الأرض. Right. So this points to a very lofty principle. Ibn Ashur kind of gets into a little bit as a mini essay, because he's looking from the perspective of a maqasidi thinker. And just generally how Allah Azza wa Jal gives strength to some, gives victory to some. And it's not always a case of victory to the believers over the unbelievers. That's the difficult part to get our heads around sometimes. And if you bring in other ayat on this theme, you find, وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. These days we alternate, good and bad, between people and between peoples. And yes, he promises to give victory to the believers. We are seeing this in these ayat as well. But there's also a need for order to be maintained through people offsetting against others. So whenever we see a tremendous superpower, establishing itself on the earth and extending its tyranny, we are sure that this situation will only last so long, until the sunnah of Allah comes to take care of it. How many empires have gone before? And then we are supposed to also reflect on the signs that we see of them, right? When you go to Egypt, for example, you can say, wow, those are really cool pyramids and really awesome sphinx and this really impressive temple. A believer is supposed to reflect on this in order to say, look at the achievement that these people had reached. Look at the ruins of these Nabateans, and much like the people of Thamud, look how they have carved houses out of the mountains in ways that we probably lack the technology to do today. Certainly lack the patience. But, how did they manage to do these things? And yet, they had their time, they came and they went. And there's a lesson in how they were dealt with and why they were dealt with. But a lot of times then Allah as well does this by having people take care of themselves, right? So in what's happening just now, what's happening on the ground, what's happening in the Middle East, the forces are pitted against each other. Yes, some of them good and some of them bad, and some of them different levels of bad, right? The painful thing sometimes when people are talking and commenting on the emerging situations is they're talking as if there's clear right and wrong in all things, and it's so simple. And not only that, they start to accuse each other and to hate each other because you're siding with these people or you're siding with those ones, instead of, obviously standing on the side of truth and justice, wherever it may be, holding to account those who do wrong, even if we might have some sympathies with those people, and making dua that Allah takes care of the matter in the best way. Like there's a dua, I saw somebody shared it beautifully, Allahumma ahlik al-zalimina bil-zalimin wa akhrijna min baynihim salimin. Wallah, have the wrongdoers take care of each other, blast each other, and let us come out from between them safe and sound. And this is often the way, right? You've got an evil and you've got a greater evil. And we
And
can't really
even these
expect
two,
the world it's going to be so simple that it's all good guys and bad guys, malaika versus shayateen. It's not so simple.
and this story is the perfect story that shows us, because of course on one side there's a prophet to be, believers of God, Bani Israel, are fighting the Amaleks and Goliath. But we see plenty of weaknesses, divisions, jealousy, love of power, wealth, status. A lot of failures, and so, like you're saying, it's not just angels versus things. I mean, the whole Baqarah has been showing us some of the weaknesses that Bani Israel fell into, and the ending of it. Now we're seeing this battle. About this verses, like you said, Ibn Ashur does a deep dive on it. وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضَهُم بِبَعْضٍ. The hadith of the Prophet that Tabarani narrates, it's like this. قال صلى الله عليه وسلم لولا عباد ركع وأطفال رضع وبهائم رتع لصب عليكم العذاب صبا ثم رص رصا. Very beautiful and poetic. If it wasn't for servants of God, like in a ruku position, like that's how bent they are, like the elderly, or children who are being breastfed, or animals that are being, grazed,
Right. Yeah.
calamities and punishments will come upon you like pouring down rain. And I'm not sure, russa rassa, I have to check that wording. But tunsaruna bidu'afaikum is another hadith, that this ummah will be victory will come due to the weakness of it, the weak ones, and the protection of the weak ones. No, maybe nastamir, inshallah.
Yeah,
We
so
finished now 2 juz of the Quran. I
mashallah.
said this last week, but it's actually today. I did a mistake.
So yes, indeed. So then the ayah kind of seals this discussion. It just nicely comes at the end of a page and sort of feels like the pages are almost laid out to help make this. And also, juz is not, of course, a revealed section. That's to say, there's no, the Prophet ﷺ did not speak about ajza and saparas and so on. So it's interesting in a way. This juz does end on such an ending note. That's a nice kind of happenstance, let's say. So these are the revelations of God which we recite to you with the truth, and you truly are one of the messengers, consolation and strength. And then in the next ayah, there is still a kind of connection between what has gone before and moving on to another topic. But this, it does tie in closely with the theme of fighting, but then there is fighting that happens within the ranks of the followers of the prophets, between the believers, between the different communities that follow the revelations. And this is also something which is being warned about, lest the Muslims fall into this type of dispute. Are we reciting this page?
No, تفضل Sheikh Usari.
Let's do this, inshallah.
متع أذنينا.
تلك الرسل فضلنا بعضهم على بعض منهم من كلم الله ورفع بعضهم درجات وآتينا عيسى ابن مريم البينات وأيدناه بروح القدس ولو شاء الله ما اقتتل الذين من بعدهم من بعد ما جاءتهم البينات ولكن اختلفوا فمنهم من آمن ومنهم من كفر ولو شاء الله ما اقتتلوا ولكن الله يفعل ما يريد. يا أيها الذين آمنوا أنفقوا مما رزقناكم من قبل أن يأتي يوم لا بيع فيه ولا خلة ولا شفاعة والكافرون هم الظالمون. الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم. لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي فمن يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم. We favored some of these messengers above others. God spoke to some, others he raised in degrees. We gave Jesus, son of Mary, our clear signs and strengthened him with the Holy Spirit. If God had so willed, their successors would not have fought each other after they had been brought clear signs, but they fell into dispute. Some believed and some disbelieved. If God had so willed, they would not have fought each other, but God does what he wills. You who believe, give from what we have provided for you before the day comes when there is no bargaining, no friendship, and no intercession. It is the disbelievers who are the wrongdoers. God, there is no God but him, the ever-living, the all-sustaining. Neither slumber nor sleep overtakes him. All that is in the heavens and the earth belongs to him. Who is there that can intercede with him, except by his leave? He knows what is before them and what is behind them, but they do not comprehend any of his knowledge, except what he wills. His seat extends over the heavens and the earth. It does not weary him to preserve them both. He is the exalted, the tremendous. There is no compulsion in religion. True guidance has become distinct from error. So whoever rejects false gods and believes in God has grasped the firmest handhold, one that will never break. God is all-hearing and all-knowing.
In terms of munasabat, Imam Baqai says that after mention has been made of all these prophets and other figures, the reader's soul naturally wonders about who were all these prophets and whether they were all the same. And so he says, mention is made of these prophets and how there are different ranks. But an interesting thing, tilka rusulu, I was a bit surprised. Imam Harradi says that tilka, here the English says we favored some of these messengers, the word these. Now, tilka is like ulaika, it's a adat of something to show the distance. One is feminine and the other one is masculine. Now, sometimes for the messengers, the word ulaika alladhina hadahumullahu fabihudahu muqtadi, if I'm not mistaken. Sometimes it's ulaika is used, but here tilka, the feminine, is used. While Imam Baqai says it again shows their high rank and so on. Imam Harali says actually it's pointing to a secondary rank due to what their followers will fall into in terms of dispute and ikhtilaf, which the ending of this verse points to. And he says there are some Arabic grammarians who have pointed this out, that if you want to, in Arabic, make something exalted, you don't use the feminine, but when you want to make it the sort of the secondary level meaning, this type of thing is used. So I had never come across that. Personally, Imam Baqai's opinion sits more closer to me because tilka rusulu immediately says فَضَّلْنَا بَعْضَهُمْ عَلَى بَعْض.
This is where we have a فيه another moment. So yeah, it's okay. It's a query, isn't it? And I think the answer is not.
Which one do you have فيه نظر for Imam Baqai or Imam Harali?
The idea that the use of the feminine indicates a lower rank.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think this is convincing at all. Because in this regard, we would need to then do a tatabbu' of where these things are used, and then and maybe he's done so and come to that conclusion. But but here, either you're looking at it as them as a plural, which is made of individuals, or you're looking at them as a unit, essentially a plural unit, in which case the feminine singular is used. You're either looking at them as themselves as the people, or you're looking at the word ar-rusul being a broken plural. So I would say these are equivalent, and any difference between them is extremely subtle. And then it's only going to be then evidenced by what is in the ayah. It's pointing back to the rusul that have been talked about.
Just to be clear, he says that it's due to the communities, not the messengers themselves, obviously.
Yeah, but then how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, he does a bit of the taboo. He does say when the shan is to see their oneness and the greatness, the word ulaik is being used. When there's about ikhtilaf is being coming, tilka is being used. But so I don't know if it's
but there's not that many cases of it in the Quran that we could say, oh, if there's one of this and one of that, then khalas, it's not a rule, is it? Just a observation.
Yeah. Sometimes, a lot of the time scholars try to come up with a rule, but then others will like there's this one that every time rih is mentioned in the Quran, it's meant to be something evil, but riyah is shown in a positive way. But other scholars have shown that's not the case. Yeah.
So anyway, it's just these are subtleties. So the point of the ayah is that these are messengers, right? Who there are different ranks among them, and that fits with the point of the surah, in which there is the favoring of some nations above others. The nations were given special things, and that doesn't necessarily mean that, number one, they are the greatest in all senses, or that they will never be replaced by anyone else, or there will not be anyone who comes after them, right? So God spoke to some, we know who is intended here. It's Musa alayhi salam. And Isa alayhi salam is mentioned by name. And then in between, وَرَفَعَ بَعْضُهُمْ دَرَجَاتٍ, Ibn Ashur here takes the view that this is a reference to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and not a sort of general statement as it may sound. Because if you see it as a general statement, it's kind of repeating the point about فَضَّلْنَا بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. So you see here that he said, great.
Sohaib, I got the feeling you don't have an issue with repetition.
Well, the point is, it's here not repetition that reinforces, but repetition that raises a question that why فَضَّلْنَا بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ, there should be bayan of it. وَرَفَعَ بَعْضُهُمْ دَرَجَاتٍ is not bayan. Right, so it's not.
And in between, there's man kallam Allahu.
So it sounds like it should be making a distinct point in regards to where it is. So
I was just teasing you slightly.
That's okay, but there is some repetition and reinforcement even in this ayah, right? وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَقْتَتَلُوا وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَفْعَلُ مَا يَشَاءُ. This is like repeating and sort of summarizing and reinforcing what has gone before, right? So, but here you see that Allah has given special favor to Musa alayhi salam, something which he didn't do in the same way for messengers in general. So with Bani Israel as well, he has given them many favors, and he's recounted those in this surah, and he's favored them over other peoples. That does not mean there will be no nation after who are given any fadl, right? So there's once you see it, a very obvious connection here with the situation of Bani Israel, that minhum man kallam Allah. Even maybe there's something in it that Musa is mentioned here with the fadl and not his name, right? He's mentioned in the what he was favored with and not who he was as a person, because they attach themselves to his person, and they identify through lineage and through these things, right? So God spoke to some. There are those that God spoke to. He raised some up, and in the Mi'raj, right? And we also favored Isa alayhi salam with things which were unique to him and special to him. None of this means that there won't be the follow-up, right? And of course, yes, we do say, and we clarify, that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the last of the prophets. But that's because he was sent as such. There was no sending of Musa alayhi salam as the final prophet or Isa alayhi salam as the final prophet. That was not part of their message. You don't find that in their teachings. You don't find it in what they say. And of course, Jews do not say that he was the last prophet either. Right? The many, many prophets. Min ba'di, Musa, we just saw in the previous story, many, many prophets came, but they had this assumption that it would only come from within their tribe. And then Isa alayhi salam came from within their tribe, but they rejected him too. He was given a special rank. He was given something which then, in a way, upset the systems that they had built up, because he wasn't the kind of pliant prophet who somehow they managed to, obey, disobey, beat down. Isa alayhi salam had something else, and he challenged the religious establishment in such a strong way.
And not to add their financial monopoly as well.
Yeah. So all the systems were not just, of course, religious systems, but everything is for self-interest. And this surah as well has been underlining this and emphasizing how they are falsifying things for personal gain. They have bought certain things by selling off other things. And that contains, of course, a reference to what they are doing for money.
What do we understand? وَأَيَّدْنَاهُ بِرُوحِ الْقُدُسِ.
So did we encounter this earlier in the surah? I'm pretty sure we did.
Oh, we may have. I mean, the Christians always talk about this Holy Ghost thing. Obviously, it's there's only one God. We don't believe in a Trinity, but Quran puts a lot of emphasis, a bit more than normal, about this Ruh al-Qudus. And I'm guessing it must be something more special with Isa alayhi salam. It's not just that Jibreel alayhi salam came with the revelation. Some sort of a ma'iyah with him, or some sort of a supporting him through different stages, or maybe to do with his miraculous birth.
Yeah, and part of the reason to so there is a view, by the way, that Ruh al-Qudus, when it's mentioned in these ayahs, is referring to his own spirit, because elsewhere he's called Ruhum minhu. Isa himself is a ruh. So it's like we gave him the qualities of strength in the spirit that we blew into his mother.
Okay.
Right? That's another view. Well, the more obvious view is this one, that this is a reference to Jibreel alayhi salam. There is a support from that in the Quran. قُلْ نَزَّلَهُ رُوحُ الْقُدُسِ مِنْ رَبِّكَ بِالْحَقِّ in Surah Al-Nahl. And then the Prophet ﷺ has used this term as well. إِنَّ رُوحَ الْقُدُسِ نَفَثَ فِي رُوعِي أَنَّ نَفْسًا لَن تَمُوتَ حَتَّى تَسْتَكْمِلَ أَجَلَهَا. So he referred to Jibreel alayhi salam that Ruh al-Qudus has cast into my being, into myself and awareness, that no soul will die until it has completed its time period. And he's also said to his poets, to Hassan, "Uhjuhum wa ma'aka ruh al-Qudus." Yeah, basically, drag them, and this Holy Spirit is with you, right? So, so this term does correspond, and perhaps the purpose of using this term is not actually to support their wrong beliefs, but in order to kind of subvert them and say, yes, you are talking about something called the Holy Spirit, but you seem to have got mixed up here by thinking that's part of God and not something by which God helped his servant, his messenger. So أيدناه بروح القدس. That's the three persons are all here. Allah Azza wa Jal has supported His messenger with the spirit angel. So they're being then pointed towards the right analysis of the situation.
Yeah. Just going back to the the prophets, I guess, being preferred over others. I mean, the Diana Tafsir talks about how the prophets all share, the attributes like the Isma, Fatana, and so forth. Tabligh. So they're all kind of the same in that level, but then there is also differences between them. Ibn Kathir kind of argues that it narrates the hadith of a Jew who gets slapped by a Muslim because he says that Musa had superiority over all human beings, and how dare you say that, and slaps him. Then it comes and tells the Prophet ﷺ, and he says, the Prophet ﷺ says that he said, don't prefer me over him. I will not know whether the unconsciousness Musa suffered on the trumpet sufficed for him, or if he got up before me. So do not give me superiority above the prophets. Ibn Kathir mentions that this hadith gives us a good understanding that we shouldn't really get into disputes and arguments and try to argue the superiority of one prophet over the other. That's for Allah to know and His decision. But when I looked at the Diana Tafsir, Ibn Ashur actually, Ustadh said he quotes heavily from him, and he mentioned like 7-8 reasons why the Prophet is preferred over other prophets. Things like his message went to all humanity, and it will continue until the world revolves. The prophethood, he was the last of the prophets. His mujiza was the Qur'an. He overcame his enemies in a very short time period. Qabr is known, and people are able to go visit and express their salams and gratitude and love to him. So yeah, even Ashur goes into those as well.
Yeah. So of course, you can see as a kind of like apparent contradiction, which is also لا نفرق بين أحد منهم. We don't distinguish between them, but of course we don't distinguish between them by believing in some and disbelieving in others. All the other prophets we know through our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his rank was also established on that night. When he was raised in degrees. وَرَفَعَ بَعْضُهُمْ دَرَجَاتِ is ishara to this whole event of Isra and Mi'raj and leading the prophets in prayer at the Masjid al-Aqsa and encountering the prophets in their various stations, if you like, in the heavens.
Some have even opined that some of these hadith about the Lawai al-Hamd and so on, sort of, they use the word abrogate, which I don't like using because for theological matters, but in a way it's like more details were given of the Prophet's greatness towards the end. Imam Busiri says, وَكُلُّ آيٍ أَتَى الرُّسْلُ الْكِرَامُ بِهَا فَإِنَّمَا اتصلت مِنْ نُورِهِ بِهِمِ فإنه شمس فضل هم كواكبها يظهرن أنوارها للناس في الظلم. All the signs that the other prophets were given, the great prophets were given, that was only connected by his sallallahu alaihi wasallam's light with them. He is the son of Fadl, this is the word that this verse uses, of bounty, and they are the stars. They display their lights to people in the darknesses. So it's a bit of a
nice.
But there's many hadiths. لا تفضلوني على don't say I'm better than Yunus ibn Matta. Particularly Yunus ibn Matta, because the Quran says وَلَا تَكُنْ كَصَاحِبِ الْحُوتِ. Don't be like the companion of the fish. But then the Prophet very clear, and we'll see it in the next page, clarifying us. نَحْنُ أَحَقُّ بِالشَّكِّ مِنْ إِبْرَاهِيمَ. we are more worthy of being doubtful, he's always actually saving the other prophets from us of having any bad opinion, su'idhan, sallallahu alayhi wasallam.
I'm going to make you prepare for that next session, inshallah. Because I'm going to do a different
Today,
breakdown.
the verse
Next
about
time.
the
Next time.
Sometimes, I mean, that's a really good point, Sadeq. Like, just to defend our own position, we could be basing something that's haqq or truth. We don't know. So in the case of, let's say, when you're arguing over prophet, Musa alayhi salam is a prophet, other prophets are prophets. Like, if you say anything, that could be very dangerous as well at the same time. So,
I don't know if it's permissible to say this with regard to prophets, but I heard this being said regards to companions, and I really liked it. There is someone who's got a higher rank than someone else, but sometimes the marjuh makes tarajjuh on the rajih on certain matters. So the one that's preferred over sometimes is higher than others in specific matters. Like, according to Sunni Islam, Abu Bakr who was the general Khalif and Imam after the Prophet he led the prayers, he led the Hajj pilgrimage. So he represented the nubuwwah of the Prophet and there's no khilaf in that. But when it comes to who represented the family of the Prophet the Ahl Bayt, well, the leader in that was Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. So that's why when revelation from Surah Tawbah comes, the Prophet asks Sayyidina Ali to convey to Quraysh and not Sayyidina Abu Bakr. To the point where Sayyidina Abu Bakr says, Ya Rasulullah, has something been revealed bad about me that I'm not allowed to do this? He says, no, but Jibreel just commanded me that it has to be someone from your family. So there you can see Sayyidina Ali in terms of Ahl Bayt. If this is permissible, if we apply this to prophets, yes, the Prophet is the Imam and Mursaleen, but perhaps in certain matters, Sulaiman alayhi salam had a bigger kingdom than he did. If we wanted to look at it like that. Allahu Alam. I don't know if I say my controversial views because I know you and Ustadh Sohaib are here.
I mean, yeah, it's just what good comes from, debating such matters or raising some people over others. Their rank is with Allah. And at the end, what difference will we make to that situation? Nothing.
Yeah.
What difference will we make to ourselves? Only confusion and also discord and dissension and argumentation that leads nowhere. Why not focus on, as ayat before have emphasized, تلك أمة قد خلت لها ما كسبت ولكم ما كسبتم. Right, so you just do what you're supposed to do. Respecting all of them is from Iman. That's what it comes down to. Right. So in the next ayah, of course, the believers are addressed. And this is a theme which has, come up before in some ayah, talking about the last day. We saw it before in address to Bani Israel, وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا, and then later on in the surah it will come again. So it's one of these things that permeates through the surah, but here with an ishara specifically to giving, to spending, and that's going to be also sort of picked up after a page or so. So inshallah next week's session we'll pick up on this theme of spending in the way of Allah. It's come up before as well, of course. مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يُقْرِضُ اللَّهَ قَرْضًا حَسَنًا. So these are some of the things that kind of permeate through the surah. Giving in the way of Allah right from the beginning. وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. And being focused on the hereafter. وَبِالْآخِرَةِ هُمْ يُوقِنُونَ. Right in the beginning as well. So there are hardships that the believers are facing, that they're going to face in future. They have to be prepared to do what is necessary. And all of that certainty in the hereafter is essential for that. Wala shafa'a, of course, here, no intercession. We have to bring in the other ayat which are relevant to the subject. And we have even the next ayah, this kind of clarification or the caveat is provided so that you see, and there's no shafa'a, that is to say like a a guaranteed intercession. Right? There's nothing that you can do to ensure that your intercession will be accepted, because it is according to Allah's pleasure and satisfaction that He grants the right to intercede to whomever He wills. So nobody can kind of step in and make God do something that He does not intend to do. Right? But it's an honor that He gives to the shafi' and to the mashfu' lahu. So above all, of course, the Prophet ﷺ is the intercessor for his ummah, and that is an honor that is given to him to stand in that place, and is also an honor for those who receive the intercession of the Prophet ﷺ. Right? Illa bi'idhni, and various other ayat in the Qur'an which point to this. So there are some ayat which say wala shafa'a, so they have to be qualified.
And even the word khulla, there's no friendships on that there. There's another verse that says al-akhilla al-mu'min in Surah Furqan, that the believers are basically the friendship, the special friendship between believers will continue to the Day of Judgment. Here it's
الأخلاء يومئذ بعضهم لبعض عدو إلا المتقين.
إلا المتقين, yes. Yeah. So the believers, the true taqwa people, will have that friendship. So and I guess it comes to the thing reading, Ustadh Sohaib, the qira'ah reading as well, because la bay'un, you can read it with the dammatain. I think there was also qira'ah with the la bay'a fihi wa la khulla and nafiya lil jins. So no, and then we go into the Imam Baqai says that this verse is, whenever the ikhtilaf is brought up and iqtital, the fighting, it points to jihad. It means there needs to be financial. So it's a normal case in the Quran. When jihad is implied explicitly or implicitly, it's immediately followed by some sort of spending and supporting that jihad, which is the imadul jihad, is nafaqa. Yeah. And then we go to the greatest ayah.
I was just going to mention before, perhaps we get there, but we did mention that we know there's intercession on the Day of Judgment, as Ustadh Sohaib said, but this verse doesn't mention it. It says there, there's no bargaining and no friendship, so everyone's kind of on their own. It's a good warning that, like, for the people who trust themselves or who trust their own deeds. It's a bit like the hadith when the Prophet says to Umar radiallahu anhu, whoever testifies that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is his messenger will enter paradise. Umar radiallahu anhu hesitates a little. He fears that if the people hear about this, then they will lack the effort, the amal, and the work. So I feel that this verse is kind of reminding us, yes, we know that there will be intercession on the Day of Judgment, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the all-merciful, but yet we just need to prepare for it as if these things are not there in their place at all. So
it's also a day that if it's some 50,000 years, there's many different stages. And at certain stages, there is no intercession. And at certain stages, there is. You could also perhaps look at it from that angle. I mean, the Aqidah book says the Shafa'at Uzma, the great Shafa', is for the process to begin in the first place. People will be standing there, drowning in their sweat, waiting for a long time just for the judgment process to begin. And then they go from prophet to prophet. And they all mention that they aren't able to help them until finally a process of, based on that hadith. No.
Yeah. Should we give a short break or move forward to the next verse?
Up to you.
I was thinking today, why is this tafsir so long? But I just realized now that I did most of the page about the birds.
About the birds?
Yeah. I went into that page and I'm like, subhanAllah, this tafsir is not finishing. Yeah.
Okay.
But some beautiful gems I came across. Okay. What is it, Ustaz Ahmed? Ustaz Sohaib?
Are we taking a break?
Yeah, we could maybe a 5-minute break.
Tamam.
Inshallah. No worries.
Ustadh Ahmed, أنا أقرأ.
We haven't finished the page yet.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah.
I
Also,
think Imam Harali was someone who was like gifted with mukashafat. He's a bit, he says things that are quite unique and very spiritual sometimes, and sometimes it's almost like, this is like almost mulhamun alayhi, I think. Allahu alam. All of these great Mufassir scholars were pure souls in love with the Quran, spending their whole lives. Ustadh Sohaib knows them better. But I never knew much about him. And the way he just defines terms, he says it in a sentence in a way that, like Al-Ma'ani, the one I use, the website, doesn't help me as much as these definitions do. They just give me exactly what the word is and what it's not. No. You were going to say something, Ustaz Ahmed?
no, perhaps the next verse, Sadeq, you mentioned the greatest ayah in the Quran. And maybe I could start off with the hadith of Ubay ibn Ka'b radiallahu anhu. And he asked the Prophet ﷺ, the greatest ayah. So the Prophet asks him, and then he answers that Allah and His Messenger know better. But then when he repeats the question, he says, Ayat al-Kursi. And then the Prophet says, congratulations for having knowledge. This ayah has a tongue and two lips with which she praises the king next to the leg of the throne. So recorded in the Muslim. There's quite a few hadith that Ibn Kathir actually cites in regards to Ayat al-Kursi. When there's a long hadith in Bukhari about shaitan coming to steal from the charity of Ramadan, and Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu is put in place to watch it. And 3 times this thief comes, and the 3rd time he releases him each time, when the person pleads. And the 3rd time the person says that, let me teach you some words which Allah will give you benefit from. And then teaches Ayat al-Kursi to Abu Hurairah. And then the Prophet says that was the shaitan. And there's things about which maybe we can get into a bit later, but Allah's greatest names being also in Ayat al-Kursi as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of his names, just at the end, things that I learned new. His verse mentions his names and pronouns 17 times, or according to another count, 21 times. No other verse includes it this many times. It's made up of 50 words, which is the number of prayers that were obliged in the heavens at the very beginning. There was 50 prayers. It's as if this verse elevates the soul of the reader to the high place, to that high place, like Sidrat al-Muntaha, where the 50 verse praise was revealed, to place the distance of which the angels take 50,000 years to ascend to. So he mentioned this 50 number. Also, the word we were talking about intercession before, Shafa'a. Imam Baqai says, like, worldly kings are in need of intercessors because anyone can take their position. And because of that, there's always competition. And so to keep people at bay and things calm, they need to constantly consult with people and manage their affairs. Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His shafa'a is like, it's not related on that at all. There can be no shafa'a. He knows exactly what's in front of him, what's behind them, and even bi'idhnihi. So you really see the beauty of Tawheed shine in this verse. From a very spiritual angle, Imam Harali says that in reality, intercession, he says, takes place according to this verse with Allah, through Allah. Yani, the word idhin points to this. So he hides his own intercession behind the veil of intercession of the intercessors in the beginning. But then at the end, he does so without a veil. And this is a theme that Imam Harali always says, that in the beginning it's with hijab, and at the end it's without a hijab. And he quotes a hadith that points to this. He says, the prophets and messengers have interceded, and now nothing remains but al-Hayy al-Qayyum. Now,
The Hayy and the Qayyum names are with hijab. You're saying Ali al-Azim is without the hijab. Is that?
that's right. The Hayy and Qayyum is like, and he says like, the kibriya, the hadith, Allah says in hadith Qudsi, kibriya ridai wal azamatu izari, and whoever competes with me. So the kibriya, and I don't know how to translate it. The one I was interested, the one that Sheikh Sohaib recited, exalted and tremendous. But that's Aliyun Azim. He says the kibriya looks to the outer garment, the rida. It looks to the heavens, which looks to the arsh. The azama looks to the inner garment, the izar, the earth, and the kursi. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, this ayah is so tremendous that there's, it requires its own course.
I'm sure you've given a course just on this ayah, right? Is that right?
Unfortunately, no, I've not. I sometimes you just feel so intimidated by trying to capture what is there. I mean, some of the things that have been pointed out are also the structure. So you can see, for example, if we broke this up into its constituent sentences, we have got we've got 9 parts like this, right? And then even then you can find there's correspondence between this and this, and this and this, not being weary or tired, and this and this, his possession of the heavens and the earth, the intercession and the knowledge, all of this by his will. And then in the middle, what is before them and what is behind them. Even the perfect expression in the middle of the ayah. So it's like the perfection of it is on every level. And this is an ayah that we, I recite every night to my children, and reminds you of Allah's greatness, His names, and so much spiritual meaning there.
That middle sentence is like the Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in of Fatiha, isn't it?
It's almost like the bridge between the two parts, right? So anyway, this structural stuff is a kind of bid'ah, so maybe bid'ah hasana. I think Imam Bukhari would probably approve if we were to present him this idea. But that just shows you that these words are not randomly put together. There is a perfection in the way that they are framed, and running through all of that is his authority. People get into some debates over these creations of Allah that he mentions, his kursi, elsewhere his arsh, and then you mentioned the hadith Qudsi, which mentions the izar and the rida, right? So in all of this, clearly the point that you're supposed to walk away with is, Allah's greatness, His authority, His transcendence. Not the opposite of transcendence, which is, being part of creation or being similar to creation in some way, but clearly that He is above all. And, it's not, we don't get into a debate over what do we mean by above. Time is wasted on such things, right? And the spiritual energy is wasted on, instead of using that to feel the awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our hearts, we use it to split between walakin ikhtalafu, right? Walakin Allah yaf'alu ma yuri. So it's it's sad really that people get into these kind of debates when the point is tremendously clear. Allah's authority over His throne, over His kursi. And so it's almost like if you take the kursi to be different from the arsh, which is perhaps the clearest thing to do, kursi in a kind of classical usage was a footstool. That's why even you sometimes see that in the translation here. We've got the word seat. So it's like even that which is below the arsh extends over the entirety of the heavens and the earth. So again, this hyperbole that helps us to just understand that Allah is beyond our understanding. Not to understand Allah or to encompass Him with our minds, but to understand that we cannot possibly comprehend the vastness of Allah's greatness and perfection. And anytime that we think that we've conceived something, all that we can be sure of is that we have fallen far short of His right.
What was Abu Bakr saying? It's to comprehend that you cannot comprehend. There was something along those lines, right?
Yeah, عدم إدراك إدراك.
Yeah.
Let's see.
One of our greatly saintly figures in Islam, he said, "La ya'rifu Allah illa Allah."
العجز عن درك الإدراك إدراك. That's the expression. Yeah. Yes, even I like to see the term Allahu Akbar in this way as well. Although generally it's explained as Allah is greater than everything. But every time we say Allahu Akbar, in a way we're saying Allah is greater than what I even thought He was last time I said Allahu Akbar. So each time we say Allahu Akbar, it's like His greatness is more and more and more and more than we can ever conceive or express. Right? Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Why is it repeated even in the adhan? Allah is greater than everything. No, now you thought you know how great He is? No, He's greater than that. That's how I like to hear it. Allah knows best.
When you split it up to those 9 sentences, the bit that says, "Who is there? Man dha alladhi yashfa'u 'indahu illa bi'idhni," that really does look into that next line. وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ عِلْمِهِ إِلَّا بِمَا شَاءَ. Like they both have that exception, and any knowledge they have or any shafa'at they have is only by His leave. So whatever they know, He knows, because they know what's in front of them, and what's behind them they don't know, because we don't know what's behind us. The normal sensory organs aren't aware of that, except for those who are gifted with that spiritual sight to see behind them. But Allah knows what we know, what we don't know. In a very summarized
what we reveal and what we conceal.
Yeah,
what we have done in the past and what we'll do in the future. Many ways that we can take the expression as well. وَلَا يَؤُودُ حِفْظُهُمَا, again responding to certain misconceptions that people have had about the Lord needing rest in some way. So this next ayah then kind of follows from the clear proofs that are established about Allah's oneness and perfection. There is no need for any compulsion. There is no compulsion religion, because true guidance has become distinct from error. So this actually opens up quite extensive discussions, which we can get into a little bit. The general principle is nobody is to be forced to embrace the faith, just like we would not accept for them to be forced to abandon Islam for something else. La ikraha fi din, because there is the sheer force of argument and the force of the Quranic message, right? For you to understand what I mean by force here, the power of the Quranic message and its dala'il, there would never be need then to force someone to embrace the faith. And you can see in other ayat that this is the way of the unbelievers and how they have opposed the messengers. أَوَلَوْ كُنَّا كَارِهِينَ, like Shu'aib alayhi salam, I think it says, would you make us go back to your way even if we hate to do so? So you would force us to do so. So you are called upon to take the firmest handhold, the thing that is established by clear evidences, reject the taghut, which is all the satanic things and the idols and false powers upon the earth, but take hold of what Allah has given you in the Qur'an, in this deen, in the way of the Prophet ﷺ. So the questions that arise from this are, does this mean then there is no, for example, enforcement of religious rules in an Islamic society. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with that. From the context, it's more about the issue of embracing the faith. But then, is there some role of forcing in our, Islamic law of warfare? Right? Is there some level of forcing when it is said to some people, you must either embrace Islam or face, conflict with us, you may pay the jizya instead and be sort of come under the control and the governance of the Muslim entity. Some might see that as a level of compulsion, but is that a level which is excluded from the discussion of this ayah? Is this ayah abrogated? Some said it's abrogated. Famously, the previous Pope, Benedict, gave a speech in which he made this point and sort of created this big shubha in the world. He said, well, this was an early revelation and then later on in Medina. Well, that doesn't make sense because this is Medinan. But is it abrogated? You will find scholars who say so, right? And they would generally sort of talk about Surah At-Tawbah and the ayah of the sword. And I suspect we have talked about it before to some extent. Or, in fact, is this ayah abrogating of other things? This actually is Ibn Ashur's view. Ibn Ashur actually sees that this ayah cancelled out forms of compulsion which were allowed in the early days of Islam. So this was a perspective I hadn't seen before.
What were those forms of compulsion? It says, right?
So he's referring to, in a sense, that there was a need to kind of push the Arabs themselves within the Arabian Peninsula to embrace Islam. So there's the hadith. I've been instructed to fight the people. And nas here can be more limited, and Sheikh Muhammad Ghazali talks about this. And nas here is al-mushrikeen of the Arabs. But I've been ordered to fight them until they give this shahada. And we can see some of the ayat, وَقَاتِلُوهُمْ حَتَّى لَا تَكُونَ فِتْنَةً. Right? We've seen this in this surah as well. It can be understood in the sense of, some have explained that as shirk, actually. So when they explain that as shirk, does it mean then that Muslims are commanded to fight against all forms of polytheism until the Day of Judgment and to have total war? Because until unbelief is eradicated from the planet, Muslims are at war. That is a perspective that is not unknown in Islamic thought and in tafsir as well. And a lot of that will go down to Surah At-Tawbah, and seeing that Surah At-Tawbah is the final statement on the matter. And ayah 29 of Surah At-Tawbah talks about fighting against the people of the book who لا يدينون دين الحق حتى يعطوا الجزية عن يد وهم صاغرون. So Ibn Ashur, basically, in summary, his view is, for the mushrikeen, there was a time period where they were to be fought until they embrace Islam. They had to be pushed in this particular way because this was necessary to establish the core body of the Arabs who would champion Islam, right? But then this is abrogated by this verse, at which point, now from here on, it is the force of convincing through argument only. But he said that there would still be, of course, fighting, but the fighting would be where it was needed to extend the authority of the Muslim lands. As he said, Tawsi' as-Sultan. And so ayahs like that one in Surah At-Tawbah would be relevant because once you reach some people who are not Muslims, they have the option, of course, to enter into Islam, or they have the option to be in this situation which is called dhimma, in which case they are paying a jizya, they are paying a levy by which they are not expected to fight with the Muslims, nor are they paying zakat. They're paying something else, which is called the jizya, the tribute, if you like. And in that way, the matter is also there's a state also of resolution and peace rather than a state of war. Their unbelief does not have to be eradicated, but it can be accommodated within the borders of where the Muslim lands extend. So, this is obviously a very complex topic. It intersects with tafsir, but also, of course, history and jurisprudence. But it's one where actually a number of the key points, underlying evidences, are contested. Like the same ayat, people will say this ayah is nasikh, and the other one are saying it's mansukh, which points to a certain level of indeterminacy with respect to our understanding of the scripture with regards to it.
Does Ahmed, you had some narrations on these verses, I think you were going to.
It was I guess the reason of revelation Ibn Kathir mentions for this verse is, talks about how the Ansari woman who would not bear children, so they would vow that if they were to give birth and the child remains alive, that they would raise them as Jews. Because the Jews were seen as some sort of, perhaps, like they had some sort of blessing or spirituality, something holy. But then when Abu Nadir gets expelled from Medina, some of the children of Ansar were being raised among them. And then Ansar said that we will not abandon our children. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals this verse. So
I just have it because I started, there's this Quran that I'm reading. It's got the different narrations of Asbab al-Nuzul. I think you don't have any other narration. There's this one that you just mentioned, but
this is what Ibn Kathir mentions.
There's another one that Imam Tabari mentions from Tariq of Saeed and Ikrimah and Ibn Abbas, that this verse was revealed in a man from the Ansar, min Bani Salim ibn Auf. His name was Hussein. He had two sons that were Christians, it says, and he was Muslim. So he said to the Prophet, can I force them? Because both of them are refusing to accept Christianity, like they don't want to leave it. And then it says this verse was revealed. I don't know the strength of the narrations, but
Ibn Kathir mentions another incident where the Prophet tells someone to become Muslim, and he says, I dislike it. The Prophet says, even if you dislike it, but then he does not force the person to become a Muslim. He just says that even you may dislike it, you accept it, and then gradually, that قالت الأعراب آمنا قل لم تؤمنوا ولكن قولوا أسلمنا in Surah Hujurat. In a similar way, they may say we've submitted, but then the iman hasn't reached their hearts. But again, there's no compulsion in that case either. So,
yeah.
Okay, should we move on to the next page?
Yeah.
Sadeq.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Sorry. الله ولي الذين آمنوا يخرجهم من الظلمات إلى النور والذين كفروا أولياؤهم الطاغوت يخرجونهم من النور إلى الظلمات أولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون. ألم تر إلى الذي حاج إبراهيم في ربه أن آتاه الله الملك إذ قال إبراهيم ربي الذي يحيي ويميت قال أنا أحيي وأميت قال إبراهيم فإن الله يأتي بالشمس من المشرق فأت بها من المغرب فبهت الذي كفر والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. أو كالذي مر على قرية وهي خاوية على عروشها قال أنى يحيي هذه الله بعد موتها فأماته الله 100 عام ثم بعثه قال كم لبثت قال لبثت يوما أو بعض يوم قال بل لبثت 100 عام فانظر إلى طعامك وشرابك لم يتسنه وانظر إلى حمارك ولنجعلك آية للناس وانظر إلى العظام كيف ننشزها ثم نكسوها لحما فلما تبين له قال أعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير.
God is the ally
Now I
of
have
those who believe. He brings them out of the depths of darkness and into the light. As for the disbelievers, their allies are false gods who take them from the light into the depths of darkness. They are the inhabitants of the fire, and there they will remain. Have you not considered the man who disputed with Abraham about his Lord, because God had granted him power to rule? When Abraham said, "It is my Lord who gives life and death," he said, "I give life and death." So Abraham said, "God brings the sun from the east, so bring it from the west." The disbeliever was dumbfounded. God does not guide those who do evil. Or take the one who passed by a ruined town. He said, "How will God give this life after death?" So God made him die for 100 years, and then raised him up, saying, "How long did you stay like that?" He answered, "A day or part of a day." God said, "No, you stayed like that for 100 years. Look at your food and drink. They have not gone bad. Look at your donkey. We will make you a sign for the people. Look at the bones, see how we bring them together and clothe them with flesh." When all became clear to him, he said, "Now I know that God has power over everything."
One thing that Ibn Kathir mentions is that the light here is mentioned in singular while the darkness is in plural. And this also conforms with some other verses in the Quran as well. So there's only one truth, but then the falsehood is many.
من الظلمات إلى النور.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of the general sense of the ayah, it's clear. Allah Azza wa Jalla is on the side of those who believe. He responds to their calls, and he, whereas there are others who choose to align with those things which are false, the many false gods, the darknesses, who do the opposite. What light they have, they lose, they move away from. Allah has given people general guidance. He has given them revealed guidance, but they are pulled away from those things by the false gods. So then you could say that this situation is illustrated by the following stories, particularly the first of them, where this man who is generally known as Nimrod, disputed with Ibrahim alayhi salam. And this comes back from him being somehow, deceived within himself by the fact that he has been granted some earthly power, right? So, indicating that this somehow makes him have a right, a divine right even, or divinity within himself, and not willing to listen to the call for someone who says, "But there is a true God who is above you." Right? So this is very reminiscent of what we encounter with Fir'aun. And, then the people also have a role in supporting the system, in creating this delusion, which when it falls, but as it goes along, everyone is playing along. You know the parable of the emperor with no clothes. You know, so in it, everybody has to play their part and saying, "Yeah, your clothes are really fine and really extremely beautiful." Until someone just points out he's not got any clothes on. Right. So the thing is that there's systems then. With Pharaoh it's mentioned فَاسْتَخَفَّ قَوْمَهُ فَأَطَاعُوهُ. Right. So he took them for fools. And they obeyed him anyway. And that's the situation that we see in much of the world today. And only when that person finally falls, everyone says, "Oh yeah, I knew he was bad. Yeah, I know. I actually never liked him at all." Where was that when it mattered? Where was your adherence to principle when it mattered? Just like one day everyone will say, "Oh yes, that genocide that took place. We were always against that. When some of those people were supplying the weapons for it. So there is a sense of the hubris that comes from having some worldly power, which Allah tests people with. He tests those who are given it and those who are not given it, right? And آتاه الله الملك. Yeah, and then in the ayah in Surah Al Imran, تؤتي الملك من تشاء وتنزع الملك ممن تشاء وتعز من تشاء وتذل من تشاء. So you give power to some, you take it away from others, right? Like it says here, yuhyi wa yumit, right? So he does so in political sense, gives people political life or political death. وَتُعِزُّ مَن تَشَاءُ وَتُذِلُّ مَن تَشَاء. He gives them spiritual life and spiritual death, right? He raises some people up and he destroys other people. And these two things don't always correspond. Someone who is raised in mulk, it doesn't mean he's raised in izzah in reality. And someone who, is kept away from mulk, that is to say, authority on the earth, it doesn't mean that they are debased. Right? There are those who are raised in the dunya, debased in the akhirah, and some who may be lowly in the dunya, but are exalted in the akhirah. So Ibrahim a.s. poses this point to him to recognize who is the true God. And this person, does a word game. Ana uhyi wa umit. So it's not spelled out in the ayah what happened. The narrations explain that he brought out two people from the prison and he ordered one of them executed and one of them to be set free. So this is giving life to one and death to the other. So he takes this kind of metaphorical meaning, and saving a life is also ihya. وَمَنْ أَحْيَاهَا فَكَأَنَّمَا أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, whoever gives life, whoever saves a life, it is as if they have saved all of humanity. So he played a word game, and it's arrogance, it is an unwillingness to listen to what Ibrahim was actually telling him. So the ayah indicates that Ibrahim did not dwell on this and start saying, well, actually, no, you've he just goes straight to something which he is not able to provide any answer for at all. So there's the sun. My Lord is bringing it every day like that. If you are a God like you claim, then bring it from the west.
Yeah, he's Imam Bukhari says that he wanted to avoid argumentation. Al-Mira, argumentation is usually negative. There's even hadith that whoever leaves argumentation, even if he's on the truth, he gets rewards. But he moves from the anfusi signs, the signs of within ourselves, the giving of life, how we started, how we to the afaqi signs in the horizons. Although implicitly his answer is connected, because like the soul of the person that's returned to the body, the ihya, is like the sun of the body. So when the sun is to leave the world or come from the other side, it implies that. But he's saying if Nimrod was incapable of slightly changing a direction of an existent form, then how, let alone what are his chances of creating something from non-existence, and let alone placing in it a speaking soul? So it's actually a very, very strong argument, very powerful. And فَبُهِتَ الَّذِي كَفَرَ. I was saying a few things during the discussion, then I realized my mic was on mute. So if you saw me moving my mouth, I wasn't doing anything. Just two narrations.
You weren't mabhoot, yani.
Mabhoot, yeah. I was tossing whether I should say these two narrations or not, but I'll just say it anyway. But I know
Right.
some of the satis here will say fihi nazar. About the verse, Allahu waliyul ladhina amanu. It says, Hum alladhina kanu amanu bi Isa. They were the ones who believed in Jesus. So when the Prophet ﷺ came to them, they believed in him, and this verse was revealed. Both Imam Tabari quotes, and then a second narration he quotes is this: there was a people who believed in Jesus and a people who disbelieved in him. So when the Prophet ﷺ was sent, the people who disbelieved in Jesus believed in the Prophet ﷺ, and the people who believed in Isa ﷺ disbelieved in the Prophet ﷺ. So this verse was revealed. So I never heard of that, and I thought it was very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, so then the first one is this person who denies, he claims Godhead. And the second example, Ustadh Sohaib, you're going to show something?
No, when you go.
Oh, okay. We're seeing this Divine Book Club thing on
Oh,
the
I'm
screen.
sorry, I don't know why. Sorry. Yeah.
The second one is, the questioner is not a munkir like the Nimrod, but he's a bit amazed or wondered, muta'ajib or musta'abid, mustab'id. He sees, he's got some level of difficulty about the hereafter, but he's not really a bad person from the impressions that I got. Since bringing the dead back to life is such an important core theme, God sometimes addresses it by pointing out an unbeliever was defeated in argument, i.e. Nimrod, and sometimes by showing how someone sincerely trying to know how it happens for himself and for others, and that's the case of this man here. And then sometimes, because there's a third one which we'll speak next week, the case of someone who just wants to explain it for others or reach at a higher level. Yeah, so he passes by a town. Did you want to start explaining this, or we just go into it? 259.
You carry on. Let's say.
Khawiyatan ala urushiha. It's totally turned upside down. And Imam Bukhari says something interesting. Urush, he goes, is normally used for the roofs of buildings that are not meant to be too long-lasting in the first place, like some sort of I imagine like a tent type buildings. So he goes, for anyone with an eye of basira will see that actually is trying to say that this whole world is quite fleeting in nature, just by the choice of words. So he goes past by this town and he sees, and he's like, how can this town be brought back to life? Imam Bukhari says it could have been a town, or he was just connecting with that other verse. Earlier on, that thousands of people left the city early in fear of death, but then God told them to die and come back to life. So Allah made him die for 100 years and then raised him up again, saying, how long did you stay? He was quick to say a day or part of a day, because he saw that his food and drink hadn't aged. And that's the first thing that's meant to age. But then he gets informed that he stayed for 100 years. But his donkey is fully rotted away, and just the bones have been left. With the food and the drink, it says, where is it? Lam yatasanna.
He wakes up. Sadeq, he also wakes up and sees everything is built around him as well. Like,
okay.
Yeah. Anyways, continue.
Yeah, maybe tell us those narrations, because I didn't. He's just going more linguistically. The food and the drink was not aged. The yatasanna, there's a ha at the end, and according to one qira'at, it's meant to be for sakta. You stop on it. It's as if to emphatically and conclusively say that there was no doubt in the matter. So the food, the water, and he was kept intact for those 100 years.
You know what? I actually researched al-Biqa'i and al-Harali's tafsir on this ayah. Can I step on your toes for a second?
No,
So,
تفضل.
because next week, inshallah, doing the Ibrahim and the birds, I wrote a whole paper around this next ayah. So then I had to sort of look at what is said about the previous ayahs in order to see, how those meanings interconnect. Because here and then in the following ayah, it is generally taken to be another event of resurrection that Ibrahim al-Islam is bringing birds back to life. And some have said that, okay, because that's also what happens here. He's talking about yuhyi wa yumeet in the story with Nimrod. And there's a man who's raised after being dead for 100 years. So this is, all of this, these stories contain God's power to give life and death. The first contains a verbal appeal to natural phenomena. So Allah brings the sun from the east. The second one, this one that we're reading here, involves at least one supernatural occurrence and physical proof, namely the preservation of the man along with his food and drink for a whole century. Why did I say at least one? Because there's debate over وَانْظُرْ إِلَى الْعِظَامِ كَيْفَ نُنْشِزُهَا. Is it referring to the bones of his donkey? Is it referring to his own bones? Some said that. Is it referring, and this is Rashid Rida's opinion, that it's referring to the bones in general? Just look at how we give life to the dead, right? To this may be added the resurrection of his donkey from his decayed bones before his eyes, as typically explained by the Mufassirin. So I said in his contextual flow-based exegesis, Nazm al-Durar, al-Biqa'i argued, drawing from al-Harali, the common thread in the passage is proofs for resurrection. They note the progression from a stubborn disbeliever, that's Nimrod, to a skeptic who may have had some faith, that's in this ayah. Now bear in mind that oftentimes this is said to be, this ayah is linked to the story of Ezekiel. So it's supposed to be then a prophet. So you can see it as there's a prophet, or you could interpret it other than that, because it's quite open in terms of what's said here. So they suggest that it's a skeptic and then a believer, which is, of course, Ibrahim as-salam is a full believer. He comes back into that next story, who sought full certainty of heart. Based on the majority view regarding Ibrahim as-salam, and al-Biqa'i follows that, we see that Nimrod claimed to have power to give life. Then Ibrahim was granted some of that power. According to the alternative view, which is the one I will advocate next week, he was only granted deep understanding, because that power is God's sole preserve. As Allah says, Rabbi alladhi yuhyi wa yumeet. We may also argue, if we combine al-Biqa'i's view with Abu Muslim's, that we'll see next week, that there are three kinds of proof described in succession. So with Nimrod, we have an appeal to a consistent law in creation, which is the rising of the sun from the east. Then proof via a miracle, which is here, and then a rational proof in the next ayah. There we go. That's what I have for now.
How do you see that as a rational proof? The next ayah, or we'll talk about that next week?
The next ayah we'll talk on the next ayah. Because I'm of the view that it's not referring to chopping off birds.
Also, there is the three examples are also can be seen as three levels of yaqeen. So the first one, the Diyanat Tafsir talks about, it's like ilm al-yaqeen, so through like learning and thinking. Then the second example that we're seeing here, verse 259, is ayn al-yaqeen, through seeing. And then the last one with Ibrahim alayhi salam, it says istahaqq al-yaqeen, which is certainty by feeling, or like experiencing the phenomena itself. So
Imam Bukhari uses the same terminology, as if he wanted to reach that full tumanina. He even said there's one opinion that he actually was implicitly saying he wanted to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but his adab didn't let him allow him to ask it. So he was implicitly answered that it wasn't the case. But for Musa alayhi salam, because he explicitly asked it, he got an explicit answer. But that's one narration. But at the end of this verse, Imam Bukhari says that this verse also points to what a real bringing back to life would look like, not what Nimrod claimed. meanly pardoning someone from a death sentence. So if he really wanted to show that he can bring back to life in a way, that is what sort of he needed to do. With some of those modern views that was expressed about the bones, I don't know. I might like to say fihi nadar as well, because if you want to see how resurrection takes place, then you're meant to just imagine how bones will be clothed in the future resurrection. I don't know how convincing of a proof that would be.
But it's not saying to him then. It's not, when you see modern views, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not necessarily.
Oh, you mean the muqatab has changed when the last one says wandur ila al-idham?
Anyway, we don't have to defend that view. Next week I will defend wholeheartedly. But you need to prepare, by the way, if you're going to face off.
Can you send us this paper of yours?
I've got it's publicly available. Some flights.
Okay. All right.
Because I don't want any basic, really, really basic responses. I will not have patience, because I've been talking about this for about 2 years. Inshallah.
We'll still present the classical view, the Jumhur view, and then you can.
And of course, I presented it more detailed than you can imagine. The classical view.
Yeah. I'm sure if you've written a paper on it.
Inshallah. Beautiful. No worries. We'll start with Ibrahim alayhi salam next week, inshallah, with the birds.
Inshallah. Do you have a recording of a talk on this as well, says Sohaib, on that next verse?
Multiple talks on this, yeah.
Online, available?
Yep. I'll send them on the group, inshallah. So we can
send us.
We don't all have to do it for next week, but just whoever.
It would have been good if we discussed that in person, face to face, but khair, inshallah.
We'll see. We'll see, inshallah.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.